did was prepare all of my ingredients. I started by melting my 1/4 cup of butter in the microwave for 30 seconds. That's half a stick. 30 seconds worked perfectly. Next, I started mixing together my cinnamon sugar mixture. So I did 1 cup of each of the sugars, but I found that was a little bit too much, so I would suggest doing 3/4 of a cup of granulated sugar, 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar, and then I added in my cinnamon. After my cinnamon was added, I mixed it all together. Make sure that you mix it really thoroughly. You want to break up as many of those chunks as you can and make sure that you pull the granulated sugar up from the bottom and get it nice and combined with the brown sugar and the cinnamon. You want it to be nice and even. Once I had all that ready, I floured my surface and poured my dough out onto the counter. Now we talked about how sticky this dough was, so I made sure that I floured the top, and as I was patting it down, I folded up the edges and I spread flour underneath. What I did was I patted this out into a giant rectangle until it was about a 1/2 inch thick. So you can see it is huge. After I patted it out, I poured on the butter and I rubbed it around. You could use a spatula for this part. I used my hands. And then I started to spread my cinnamon sugar mixture. Now you want to make sure that you cover all of the dough with this cinnamon sugar mixture, but you don't want it to be too thick because then it's just going to dump out of the cinnamon rolls. Once I have a nice even layer of that, I started rolling the cinnamon rolls. I started at the bottom and I rolled up, and then I pulled the top over and pinched the edge. Once that was all done, I prepared my pans. I did 1 large pan and 2 smaller ones because I was sharing with my family. I greased them with butter and then I sprayed them with Pam. Once that's all set, I cut the dough log in half. So every time I cut each section in half until I had about 16 rolls, and then I divided them up between the different pans. If you were doing 2 of the larger pans, you would have 8 cinnamon rolls in each pan, but I had it divided up between a bunch, so I did 4 in each of the smaller ones. I ended up moving that extra one, and I did 8 in the bigger ones. After that, I let it sit on the counter for an hour, and I put them in the fridge overnight. After they were refrigerated all night, I pulled them out, and I left them on the counter for about an hour, and I preheated my oven to 375. So I let the dough rise a little longer on the counter while the oven was heating up. When the oven was hot, I put the cinnamon rolls in the oven and I let them bake for 25 minutes. After the 25 minutes was up, I opened it up and I took a peek at them. I found that they weren't quite golden brown enough, so I put them back in and I set the oven for another 5 minutes. You really want them to be nice and golden brown. After the 5 minutes was up, I checked them again to make sure that they were ready. And when I pulled them out, I found that they were the perfect golden brown. So I took them out of the oven and I set them on the counter to cool. What I did at this point was I flipped them upside down on a cookie sheet so that all of those gooey bubbles at the bottom dripped over the cinnamon roll. You don't have to do that, but I did. Next, we're going to make the frosting. So I started with a cup of powdered sugar. I used a 1/2 cup measuring cup, which is why I did it twice. Then I added my milk. Normally I use regular milk, but I only had vanilla soy milk in the fridge, so that's what I used. It just made the color a little different. Wasn't really that big of a deal. I added 1/4 teaspoon of vanilla extract, which I spilled, and then I mixed it all together. Now at this point I had only used 2 tablespoons of the milk. I found that it wasn't quite thin enough. You really want it to be a nice drizzling consistency. So I added a half a tablespoon more of milk. You can play with this, however thick you want your icing or frosting to be. That's how thick you can make it. It's completely up to you. Alright, so you can see how I had turned my pan upside down. I did it onto a cookie sheet. So I pulled that off, set it to the side, and I started drizzling the icing all over, trying to evenly distribute it as best as I could, because you gotta get it all over each of the cinnamon rolls. Now if I had left it in the pan, if I hadn't turned it over, that would have been totally fine, and I just would have drizzled the icing over the tops of it, just like normal. It works very well either way. Alright, and those are our cinnamon rolls. The house smells heavenly. You guys should definitely make these at home. Used it with the pizza dough that we made yesterday. It was really, really simple and easy to do. Let me know if you guys do it at home, and happy Friday. I hope you have a great weekend.